Legends of the Bully. Story 1. Paratrooper, a modern tall tale. The sickly sweet yet spicy taste of the half-smoked cigar that jutted out of Sergeant Leon Bully Flat's mouth mixed with the coppery taste of his own blood as the private landed a punch. Bully grinned, blood running down his chin. "That's one, boy," he growled. The 6'6" kid from the Bronx punched Bully again, this time sending the smaller man to the ground. He bounced up and smiled, chewing on his cigar, out of habit, and then spitting out some of the chewed tobacco. "That's two," Bully chuckled. "You only get one more, Junior." The kid hit him again, breaking Bully's nose, and the sergeant stayed bent over for a second. Then he straightened, smiled, looked Junior right in the eye as he set his own nose with an audible crack. "Okay, boy. My turn. You ready?" "Fuck you, Sarge," the kid panted, his fists up and ready. Red rage filled his vision as he let go and the monster took over. He walked right into the kid's defenses, taking two sharp smacks, one to his eye. "That'll leave a bruise." That thought skittered across the red haze of the rage that filled him. He took Junior by the throat and lifted him a bare inch off the ground, since that was all as far as the smaller man's left arm would reach. He drew back his right hand and punched Junior right in the diaphragm and dropped him to the ground. Private Junior Moreno lay on the ground, all his breath emptied from his lungs. Bully knelt. "Listen here, you little motherfucker. If you wanted a goddamn cigar." He pulled the stubby, chewed item from his mouth and showed the nasty little thing to the kid. "You go find it somewhere else." He stood and then stomped his boot into the kid's face, crunching his nose. Bully walked around the boy who lay squirming on the ground holding his face. He didn't know how or why, but the rage faded, though he knew that someday his temper would take him too far. He hadn't done it yet. He knelt down next to the squirming man again. "Look here, if you ever even look at me sideways again, I won't just teach you a lesson." Bully drew his Bowie knife and showed the private his gleaming blade. "I'll slit your fucking throat for you. Do you understand that, boy?" Bully was the image of a lunatic. Blood ran down his face, completely ignored from a cut above his eye. Blood and drool ran out of the side of his lips, and as he smiled, his teeth were red with blood. The kid squirming on the ground nodded vigorously. "Good," Bully said. "I don't need any fucking thieves or pussies in this outfit. So stand up and get over it. And don't be a fucking puss." "Hey, you need a medic, Sarge?" someone called from the crowd. Kid's strong, but I only got a broken nose. It's set." He watched the private sit up. "You need a medic, kid?" The boy shook his head vigorously. "No, Sarge, I'm good." "Good man," he said and pulled the kid up. Yank City kids needed to be taught a lesson a time or two. And for some reason they couldn't shoot for shit. Of all things for a soldier to be bad at. Bully had the advantage of growing up on a dirt farm in the middle of nowhere, and life was hard. If you survived it, well, that was because you were just meaner than the world was. They'd be called to jump soon, so he wanted to relax as much as possible before the briefings began. Patton himself, it was said, was in the camp, so it meant some sort of big operation. It was, in fact, a very important operation, and Bully Flat found himself standing at attention before the general himself, the supreme leader of the American forces in the European theater. "At ease, Captain," the general said. Bully just stood there at attention, confused. Captain Homer Flat, you may stand at ease, the general said. Sir, no, sir, Bully said. I'm a staff sergeant, sir, not a captain, begging the general's pardon. I just promoted you, Captain, the general said. A field promotion. Begging your pardon, sir, but no, sir. Not moving an inch, he said, begging the general's pardon, but I enjoy my rank just fine. I can't accept a promotion when I have not earned it. What's the real reason? The general asked, frowning down at his desk. Bully, is it? He chuckled. How'd you get such a nickname? And stand at ease, I said. Finally, Bully did as he was told, standing at ease. Everything was silent for a long time. What's the reason you won't accept the promotion? The general asked, his countenance saying that he had no intention of accepting anything but acceptance from the sergeant. Begging your pardon, General, but I don't like officers. They're stupid, overeducated morons, Bully said, looking the famous man in the eyes. The general just stood stunned for a moment, and then began to laugh, a deep, rich belly laugh, and sat. I don't like 'em much either, Patton finished chuckling. They call you Bully, right? Where'd you get that from? Oh, I had to find a good stout branch one time, about 3.5 feet long, and beat the shit out of my brothers. They just called me Bully after that. He shrugged. Why would you do that? The general asked, leaning forward. They stole soda pop from the store when they were supposed to just pick up some flour for our ma. He told the general. Oh, so you punished them for their thievery. You were older? Bully looked at the man, not understanding. No. I beat the shit out of them because they didn't save me any. The general blinked, and then laughed again. Okay, Sergeant. I'd heard you were a hard ass. Why didn't you use a stick? Well, I was 6. They were teenagers, Bully said with a shrug. The general leaned back, smiling. Fucking Texans. Okay, Sergeant. You're in charge of this one, and it won't matter anyway, since I'll be honest with you, and you're probably looking at a suicide mission. Bully just stood there, waiting. Have a seat, Sergeant. Let me explain. What happened to your face? You get hit by a truck? Bully shook his head with a completely straight face, said, just a disciplinary issue. The private in question is so new his boots squeak when he puts them on. We just had to have a heart-to-heart. Bully eyed the box of cigar on the general's desk. You smoke? He asked. Bully chuckled. Sorta. The general handed him one of the cigars and then reconsidered. Take the box. Share 'em with your men. You boys probably won't make it back. Bully's grim fighting face slid down over his countenance. If we don't make it back, then we'll be fighting the demons in hell, same as we're fighting them up here, sir. He got back to his bunkhouse, throwing the box of cigars at the tall private he'd corrected earlier. Hey, here you go, Junior. Hand 'em out, but save a few for when we get back tomorrow. They're from Patton. Kid's eyes grew wide. General Patton? Bully nodded. Go ahead and finish one out. Fish one out. You might not get another chance. And then Bully stumped off to get some rest. The smell of oil and dirt mixed with blood and gunpowder smoke met him as he boarded the airplane. He did love drops, but this one was going to hurt. Estimates were that none of them would survive. They were a distraction, dropped behind enemy lines so that the ground troops could take the field and break the trenches of the Nazis. The commies coming up their asses, the Germans didn't have much of a fallback position if the field could be taken. His team were to drop behind their lines and cut their way back toward the Allied advance, killing everything they could on the way. And imagine counting on fucking commies, Bully growled. "What was that, Sarge?" a corporal asked as he shut the side of the door of the plane. "Nothing, Corporal, nothing. Strap in." He took a position the CO normally took on the jump next to the door. He'd be the last one out. This was the reason they lost so many officers. When the first troops drop, they only have to worry about ground troops and flak from a little of the anti-aircraft. The last ones out of the plane have to worry about a hell of a lot more anti-aircraft pointed at their chutes instead of the airplanes. "How'd you get this assignment, Sarge?" Junior asked him. Bully grimaced. "I'm lucky that way." He spat out some tobacco from his cigar. "Shut up, kid. You need to focus. Otherwise you're going to get filled full of Nazi lead." "Yeah, you're a mean motherfucker, all right," Junior growled low. "You goddamn right I am. And you better remember that." He looked up and down the bay where the men waited to pretty much die. "Every one of you. That's why we're here. Because it takes rotten, sorry son of a bitches like us to fight these demons from hell. If I'm the hero of this story, then the bad guys are the worst there are." The truth was, he was part of an experimental team of 6 men. Normally they worked together, but it was for this reason he had chosen to lead the jump. He had a tracker they had placed in his head just before he had deployed. Years later, somewhere in his 70s, a VA doc would find the transistor near his temple attached to his skull during a routine MRI. "Well, shit, I'd forgotten that was even there," was all the old man had said about the implant that had been attached to his skull since the World War II era, almost 40 years before. "You don't look that old, Sarge," another man asked. "You don't seem much older than me, and I'm only 18. Bully pulled his cigar out of his mouth and looked at it, then stuck it back in and started chewing. "What year is it even?" he asked. They all laughed nervously. "Let's just say I'm old enough," was all he would say about it. Hell, that's all he would tell our family when we asked him how old he was. I don't think he really knew. He'd been lying about it for so long. The truth was, he had forged documents to enlist before the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. He had been 16, and he had found a place for himself among hard men of the military. Finally, the time came from the jump, and the navigator came over the static field radio. "Get 'em up, Sarge. Get up, boys. Time to kick the gates of hell and show these Nazi bastards why we're troopers," he said, and pulled the lever for the door to open. The wind that hit him brought an even sharper smell of gunpowder, drowning out the oil smell of the aircraft. Explosions began rocking the craft as minor anti-aircraft shells exploded around them. The navigator gave him the go-ahead, and men began falling out of the craft, their chutes opening as their lines went taut, attached to the exit of the plane. He waited, and once everyone was out, he fell himself. That very brief free fall was gratifying in every way, and he had always loved it, even though it was always too short. Most of a paratrooper's training was, in fact, how to steer the awkward chute once one was floating lazily down, a perfect target for anyone with a high-velocity weapon. You had to avoid flak and enemy fire, and most people just didn't make it to the ground. Unfortunately for Bully, a shell went off near him, shattering his eardrums and sending shrapnel into his back with searing hot pain. His legs went instantly numb, and he lost consciousness for moments. He didn't know if it was the landing that woke him or time, but he found he couldn't move the lower half of his body where he lay on the ground. He looked around in a daze, only discovered that he'd also been hit in his head, or must have, since his helmet was bent and misshapen on the ground near him. His head pounded, and his heart threatened to jump out of his chest. Reaching up, he unclipped the chute from his upper body and began to crawl. In his pain, he had to let rage take over to fuel him, and all that rage cared about was making someone or something pay. If he were rational, Bully would have known that he was bleeding out, that most likely he damaged organs and probably would never make it back home to where a young girl was waiting on him. He wasn't rational, though. He crawled toward the Nazi bastards that hurt him, and he was going to take his knife and peel the skin off of one while it screamed. He'd bathe in their fucking blood. He pulled himself through the broken and muddy dirt, through the cold black forest soil soaked with blood and the ashes of a forest that had been burned away long ago. The blood of his brothers, blood of Americans, of better men than himself, and Bully knew he had to take some of the Kraut motherfuckers with him. He drug his gun behind him and held his knife clenched in his right hand. Smoke of spent gunpowder hung low upon the earth, and though his damaged ears couldn't hear, bullets zipped past his head and shells went off around him. Still he crawled through the dirt, his rage keeping his mortally damaged body on the move. He fell into the crater left by a shell and found that kid, Junior, laying on his back, holding his side where blood spurted, surrounded by 3 Nazi soldiers. Bully's rage left him no choice, and found that his left leg worked a bit, though his right dragged behind him as he used that left leg to force his body into a leap, catching one of the enemy soldiers in the back. The knife flashed and blood sprayed even as the other 2 Germans turned to fire on a threat. Bully's knife suddenly sprouted out of the one soldier's throat, and he was weaponless, having thrown it. A gun went off and the last soldier fell, Bully laying on the ground amongst the 3 bodies. "Sarge," Junior asked. "Bully. You can call me Bully," he growled into the dirt. "You don't look so good, sir." "Well, I think I've been shot in the head, the back. I don't know. You ready, kid?" "Ready for what?" Junior asked, grimacing. "We got 200 yards to meet up with that advance," Bully growled, pulling his blade from the Nazi's throat with a squish. Then, forcing his body to crawl up to the lip of the crater. "You can't hardly move and I'm bleeding out. What the fuck do you expect us to do?" Junior asked his sergeant. "I expect, Private, for you to do your fucking job and go kill some fucking Krauts with me," Bully sighed. "Look, kid, you can lay there in your pain and your blood and give up and just fucking die. Just lay there and fucking die and be a fucking pussy." "I've lost too much blood," the kid said. "I won't make it." Bully couldn't believe that he had to teach this kid everything. "Look, kid, you feel that pain?" "Yeah, I'm fucking shot. I feel it," Junior argued. "Then use it." "I don't know nothing about your people, but I'll tell you this. Every one of my people knows something boiled into our blood and bone. When men stood in that Alamo defending a land that wasn't even theirs against overwhelming odds with no other outcome but their death, they used their pain and their outrage and they fought. And in fighting that, they inspired a whole lot of other people to come back and take what was theirs. Use that pain. Turn it into rage and let it power you. And let's go kill some fucking Krauts. So they crawled. 2 wounded men dead as they moved. They saved 3 more of their fellow soldiers as they brutally killed one after another. Later, Bully would say he didn't even remember how many. But it wasn't that simple. Bully clenched and counted over and over 13 scalps he'd claimed. He clenched them in his feet as if they were what he'd rescued. Gripping them, he knew what he'd done, he'd been made to do. It's what his purpose was. Fight the only things worse on this world than he was. Mildred stood at the foot of her fiancé's bed, the government doctor standing next to her. "Bully, you stubborn son of a bitch," she whispered. "Don't you dare die on me." The army doctor looked at her with something like sympathy, and she didn't need his goddamn sympathy. She kept quiet, grimacing. "I'm sorry, but it looks like he won't live through this. I can't give him more than 6 months. And even if he were to live, he'll never walk again. His skull was shattered." The doctor just shook his head. "I don't know how he crawled and killed his way 200 yards with a crushed skull and a partially severed spine." She just stood there silent. "We put a steel plate in his head with screws," the doctor explained. "If he makes it, he should be okay there, but he won't ever be able to use his legs again. He'll need help the rest of his life." "The fuck I will," a groggy voice growled, clearly not conscious. "What?" the doctor said, checking his vitals. "Well, I'll be. He might be awake by tonight," Bully Flat said in a groggy voice. "Millie, will you be a doll and get me one of my cigars?" And then he fell back to silence. They'd given him medals, Purple Hearts, Silver and Bronze Stars, and others we never even really did discover because they'd been sold somewhere in the past. They'd even thrown him a parade, and he sat gloomily chewing on his cigar in the old Model T car. "Let Audie Murphy be their fucking Boy Scout poster boy," he growled at his wife. "I don't need this." She just looked at him and smiled. "Oh, well, you ain't got a choice, so deal with it." Mildred honestly didn't know what to do. Bully hadn't been himself. He just sat there in his chair, or his wheelchair outside, and stared down at his boots most days. Mildred had wheeled him out to the backyard of the old farmhouse they'd lived in. And that was where he sat, staring at his boots, remembering each kill on that bloody field in Germany as well as he could, letting his rage keep him alive, just as it had always done. His rage at the injustice, at his sudden uselessness. "Ah, there you are," a voice called as a man entered the backyard. Bully just grunted at his brother-in-law, Leon. "What the hell are you doing, Bully?" he asked. Though Bully only looked up when something hard hit him in the head and arm. It was a stick, polished and carved. A walking stick. "What do you expect me to do with this?" Bully asked. "I expect you to stop feeling so fucking sorry for yourself and get your ass up out of that goddamn chair," Leon stated, his tone harsh. "I can't. The doc told me." "Like when did you ever care what anyone said you could or couldn't do?" "What did you go over there to do? Learn to be a pussy?" Bully growled. You shut the fuck up. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. What this sorry old crippled pussy gonna do about it then? Leon asked with a sneer. That old friend, rage, overwhelmed Bully. On most days he didn't like many people. Hell, he didn't like hardly anyone. But today, and lately, he'd just soon kill you, spit on you. He found himself standing, holding his brother-in-law's shirt in his left fist. When he realized, he looked down and found himself standing 3 feet from the wheelchair, leaning on the walking stick gripped in his right hand, his left leg shaking as it held him up. He dragged the useless right leg behind himself all the way. Leon looked shocked, but slowly began to laugh, Bully only joining him after a moment. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you with this later, he said, holding up the stick to his brother-in-law. But I'm too tired just now. My grandfather lived to be 82 or 85 or 87. None of us grandkids could ever keep track of the lies he always told about his age. I think he was 72 for like 4 years in a row, but I'm not sure. And though the doc said he'd never walk again, he walked with a cane, dragging his right leg till the week he died. And that walking stick was something we all feared. I hope you enjoyed this tale. It's really special because, it's my granddad. And though he wasn't a very good person, sometimes not the best people are the heroes. Have a great day, and thank you.